Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, please welcome Lucy Parker, author of the book, The Activist Leader, A New Mindset for Doing Business. Lucy, welcome.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you, especially since I have so much family and my grandmother came from England. So it's nice to talk to somebody from the country that I guess my family has emanated from. So that's fantastic. And before we talk about the book, why don't you tell us how you got to where you are professionally? Because you've had an illustrious career and you've been a big help to your own government.
Well, thank you for that. Well, at the moment, I'm a senior partner at the business Brunswick. Brunswick is a global advisory firm with offices all over the world, working with all sectors of business to help them really show up in the world on the big critical issues that are on the radar screen of the leadership there. And that's all kinds of issues. Could be the next M&A deal they're doing. It could be the next regulation agenda they're tackling. The part of the business that I lead and founded and lead with my co-author John Miller is about how business shows up on the big societal questions that these days have become big business questions. We often shorthand that to the social value of business, and I've been doing that for nigh on 50 years with John. And of course, one of the things that's interesting to me about that is how that's changed in that decade. I have been an advisor and a coach to senior business leaders for several decades. And that grew out of the fact that I began my career as a BBC broadcaster doing documentaries. And of course, in that field, what you're really doing is looking at big societal questions and trying to make sense of them, trying to make a case for what's happening there and make the way people engage with it simpler, easier, clearer. And interestingly, that took me into coaching senior business leaders on how they project the agenda that they are aiming to bring people along. What strategy is the business setting out? Why would people want to follow it? Why would I believe them? How do they want to act as a leader? How do they want to behave? That took me for a while into an invitation from Gordon Brown, then Prime Minister of the UK, to lead a task force, which was on the skills and talent in a global economy. How are skills and talent part of competitive edge in a global economy? Of course, anybody in business knows the skills and capabilities you field to deal with your business on a global stage is mission critical. So I was really honored and delighted to work on that for some years with him. And then went back into the business field and really realized that there's quite a chasm between the way businesses operate and governments operate. I think before I'd done the government role, I thought that perhaps they were closer to each other. There was a closer interpretation to have. But I really learnt to see that there's sort of two worlds here and they're not very good at talking with one another. And I feel that's a real value destruction for business and for nations, and indeed wider society. So that's why John and I founded the work we do now in Brunswick on the social value of business. And we're now really helping companies all over the world on every big issue that's on the radar screen of senior leadership show up. How are they a constructive force on these big societal questions?
So why did you write this book?
Well, that's a great question. We wrote it because we were in the field. We've been in the field, nose to nose, shoulder to shoulder with business leaders over 15 years as they wrestle with these questions. And it's really hard. It's very difficult. And it's become an absolutely central thing in business leadership. These questions used to be peripheral. They used to be low on the business agenda. They are now not only high on the business agenda, they are on the board agenda. They are on the executive to-do list. And we've seen businesses wrestle with that. And if I look at business leaders today and what they're dealing with, one of the things that's confusing them is, how do I act on these questions? Business leaders today mostly have been brought up in, are well-founded in how they deliver and explain how they deliver financial value. That is how they grew to be the senior leaders they are today. But they're probably not very conversant with, very comfortable with, very confident with how they describe their relationship to these other questions. And so they're asking themselves, how do I do this? And literally every business conversation I was having was, how do I do this? And if you've been so close to it for 15 years, you can actually see there are very clear patterns. It's not as mysterious as all that. And so this is very much a practitioner book written out of experience with business leadership, out of my colleagues' experience. This is what we know about how it works. And we wanted to share the patterns because we think lots and lots of businesses are looking for these patterns of how to act best on these questions.
Why is there so many doubts among leaders about ESG and other issues like this? Like, well, I mean, it just seems common sense, as we talked about before we started the show. I mean, it's just obvious. I don't get it.
Well, at one level, when you actually start to look at it, you do go, isn't this common sense? And actually, one of the things that really pleased me when the book was out and written was so many people said, oh, I see, this is common sense. This is actually very clear. So why is it so contested? Why is it so difficult? One of the pictures in my mind's eye is that a long time ago, when we started to work on these things, ESG was just beginning to be heard about, beginning to be thought about. And most businesses sort of had ESG as something they took out of the cupboard once a year and went and spoke to socially responsible investors about and then put back in the cupboard. But it was small, it was in a little package, and they didn't look at it much. As these issues have got more and more complex, more and more urgent, have become part of the business agenda. So they've taken that out of the cupboard, they've put it on the boardroom table, they've unpacked it, and they're realizing that ESG as it was is not really fit for purpose. You can't bundle all of those things together and come up with a single number. All of these things have different imperatives. In fact, some of them are complicated trade-offs against each other. And even more profound than that, this is not how businesses have been run forever. Businesses have been run to say, we are delivering products and services to customers and they pay us and we take the money ourselves, we give some to the shareholders, we reinvest, we make more product, we sell. That's all we're doing. These questions have not been on their radar screen. Surely government does that. Somebody else does that. In today's world, big businesses are now systemically important actors in these very questions. So actually business leaders have to treat with them and engage with them in a different way. And that's causing a lot of debate and confusion. How should they engage? On which issues? To what degree? All of them or some of them? Ambitiously or cautiously? In the center of the business or peripherally? So this huge debate is going on, which is now really about what kind of business leaders do we need for the future. Most people, I think, would look at a big business today and go, we can't have business leaders that don't understand the question of inclusive workforces. We can't have business leaders that don't understand the physical risks of climate and what's that going to do to their business, and on and on. But that is a mindset shift. That is a paradigm shift in how businesses have always been run. So we, in a way, shouldn't be surprised that it's causing that much concern, debate, confusion. It's not a confusion about whether, it's a confusion about how, which is why we wrote the book. There are some hows you can start going on about.
Yeah, I think how and how much does this cost?
Yeah. Yeah, how is it very...
It's always about money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I can do it if it doesn't cost a lot, but if it really impacts my bottom line, which it will impact regardless, then it's different. So in chapter 1, go ahead.
No, I was only going to say, I think you're onto something when you say that, because one of the things we've seen in the last short while is people are starting to look at, including in the ESG field, oh, wait a second, we've been adding up the cost of doing this stuff. We ought to be adding up the cost of not doing this stuff. I mean, the insurance industry is really pointing the way in a lot of the environmental questions. You know, parts of the world, parts of America are becoming uninsurable. And that's not just that for individuals that's becoming uninsurable. The knock-on impact into business systems, if areas of life become uninsurable, is enormous. So people are beginning to see not only the cost of doing it, but the cost of not doing it. And in the last few years, it was easy. You heard people going, oh, well, we can save money by switching to this kind of energy or whatever it is. We're way past that now. We're past how do you actually engage with the systemic questions, invest in them, change business processes. That costs and that's difficult. But even that cost and that difficulty is less than the cost of not doing it and the difficulty of not doing it.
I thought what was great, developed, wrote the plan for the new MBA that my university has, which is focused on AI, how to create products and services as an entrepreneur, an entrepreneur in AI at Vin University. And our president, Dr. Milan, spoke that day, and she told the first class of our MBA program that why ESG is so important. And she goes, I'm telling you, it's only important because from a business standpoint, Hanoi cannot recruit new companies to come here because we're number one in the world for pollution. And that's costing us money.
Yeah.
And it's also costing us money in tourism. So if you want to look at this from a practical business standpoint, that if we don't fix these problems, we can't recruit the best and brightest. We can't create the jobs we want to create. So she went on and on about this, and people were nodding their heads. It was not this, oh, you must be some left-wing lunatic that's against business. She's saying, hey, listen, I want to make as much money as I can. I want you to make as much money as you can. The only way we're going to do this is if we solve this problem. So this is part of our curriculum at Vin University.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the fun things that I think one can see happening in this field, particularly in the field of ESG and in entrepreneurship, which is after all at the heart of your subject matter, is
Yes.
lots of businesses are springing up with the use of AI to solve ESG questions. And
Yeah.
the entrepreneurial possibility of tracking down, where is waste management in the food system? AI is being used to do that, and small businesses are bubbling up to solve those questions for big businesses. So this is very much the front edge of where these ESG questions are going, is where's the data? What can we do with it? Where are the solutions?
So in chapter 1, how do you define the activist mindset for business leaders?
Well, what is an activist? I think we think that an activist is somebody who, when they're seeing a really big, complicated, complex problem and situation, thinks, not like most people look at big, complicated problems, well, hope somebody does something about it. But they look at it and go, that's a big, complicated problem. I think I've got something to do with that problem. I think I might be able to step into that problem constructively and help. So the activist mindset is about getting on the front foot about the fact that you probably have some of the solutions, and some of the solutions are needed. And where activists are is where there's a need for a paradigm shift, where there's a need for a change. So what we've been talking about is there is a need for a paradigm shift. And in business is now integrally part of these problems. And the activist mindset in a business leader is somebody who is prepared to see that problem, to turn towards it and go, I think I'm integrally involved with that business because of the kind of business I am. And I see that I'm not the whole solution. My business isn't even the whole solution. But we might be part of the solution, and we can mobilize resources to find new solutions. That is an activist mindset. And in today's world, of course, a lot of business leaders almost recoil at the word activist. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, activists are coming at us from all sides. Shareholder activism is sort of nightmare in people's minds, that you'll be taken down from your position by a shareholder activist or NGO activists or even employee activists. People are coming at you as a business. And we're going, wait a second, you're a business leader. You can see these problems. Why have it come at you? Why not look at it in a clear-eyed, thoughtful way and go, I'm going to step towards it and take the reins myself. I want to be on the front foot of this, not on the back foot of this. A paradigm shift is required, and I can help. I can't do it all, but I can help.
What are the traditional ways businesses have viewed activism? And activism in the United States falls on one side or the other. Either people think that's a really good word because they are proud to be activist, or they look at it and say, these people are dangerous and they can't be trusted. And how does this contrast with the proposed activist mindset?
What a great way of putting that. Yes, I think that it is a contrast. I remember sitting in Washington, D.C. in the morning with a bunch of business people. They were, very senior business people, were wearing suits. They were very considered. They had good reputations behind them. I was lucky enough that they'd read this book and they said, I really, really like the book. Pity about the title. Oh, why? Sorry about the title. Well, it's a bit dangerous. I sat in a university in Washington, D.C. the same afternoon. A lot of young people around the table. I said, why did you come to this seminar on the book? They all said, I love the title. What are you suggesting? That's an interesting thing. The younger people were going, can't we focus on what needs changing? The others were kind of going, do we really have to talk that much about change? So I think it is about understanding where the change is. I think activism has, the word implies aggression, noise, coming at you. And I think we're deliberately flipping that over and going, actually, if you look at the spirit of activism, it is usually very thoughtful, very clear-eyed people going, I know I'm not the whole of it, but I am some of it, and I see that I can be involved in it. And so it's flipping the idea on its head and saying, I don't know any business leaders, actually, who aren't brilliant at driving change. That's usually why they're leaders in their businesses. They're people who like to have impact, to invent new things, to look at problems clearly. So we weren't inventing the idea of activist leaders. When we were interviewing, when we were studying, when we were looking at the leaders who are doing great things that we've been lucky enough to work with, they are activists. We were observing more than we were sloganizing. And when we talk to some business leaders about this very question, I'm not sure about the word activist, and then give them a moment and they go, well, if you meant a pragmatic activist, I'm that kind of activist. I want to get things done. You go, there you go. R.J. Banger, who's one of the best known business leaders of this generation, said, sorry, what are you as a leader if you're not an activist? Isn't that your job? So I think it raises the question, what kind of leader do you think you want to be in a world which is clearly requiring change and where your business is inherently part of the problem and inherently has the opportunity to create some of the solutions? What kind of business leader do you want to be? You want to be the leader that said, sorry, I couldn't think of anything to do about it? Or do you want to step into it?
Well, and that's right. I mean, the whole idea is you always want to hire leaders who are active, not reactive, and are setting the direction. So I think it's got branded as a bad word. And it's been fighting it ever since, right? And it's not till somebody like you explains it to people that they go, oh, I should be proud to be an active leader.
Well, just a personal reflection. When the book first came out and I was doing, talking to a lot of businesses in the business about this, every single time as we walked away, say out to the door or something, there'd be somebody who'd been involved in getting the show on the road and involved in the talk. And every single time somebody would say to me, I think I'm a bit of an activist, really. And you'd go, great, in what way? And they'll point at the thing they're trying to do in their part of the business that they're proud of. So there is something about, I do want to be that kind of a person, don't I?
I think also when people think of activist, at least in the States, they don't think of people coming with solutions. They think of them only coming with problems. And I think that's needs to be turned around as well.
That's exactly what we were pointing at.
Why are some historical figures cited as examples of activism in the book, and what traits do they exhibit? So if you can give a few examples, that would be great.
Well, I think when you say activism in the outside world, traditional way, not in the way business uses it, great figures come to mind. Martin Luther King comes to mind, whatever. These are, strong public figures. And sometimes, Martin Luther King comes to mind, sometimes Malcolm X comes to mind. So these are strong, public, noisy figures. And one of the reasons we put archetypes of activism into the book, we suggested 5 types, was to say that's not all there is when you think about activists. We named 5 different kinds, and I won't go into detail on all of them. But one of the things that was very interesting is, I don't know if you've come across Peter Benenson. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer in the UK, actually, pinstripe lawyer. He was going to work one day, reading an article about Portuguese students who'd been put in prison simply for toasting liberty. He thought, that's not right. I think I should do something about that. And as he started to take up their case and think he could do something about it, he actually found, if you look back, he founded Amnesty International, one of the greatest forces on the planet for political prisons. That was a lawyer just thinking, I don't think that's right. I think I could do something about that. That's a very quiet man. He wasn't a noisy man. Nobody's ever even heard of him, really. But he was out there. You know, Scylla Elworthy was a terrific bridge builder during the Cold War, bringing different people together, just quietly listening, creating a space where they could talk to each other off the record. These are not people who would characterize themselves as activists. Muhammad Yunus was a banker, and he was there in Bangladesh going, actually, one of the things holding prosperity back in Bangladesh is banks can't lend money at small enough rates. Surely there's a way of doing that. And this was the pathfinder kind of activist, you know, there must be a better way of doing this. And he invented microcredit, which has been a huge sweeping force for poverty around the world. You know, these are people who would not have characterized themselves as activists, but they had that spirit of seeing a problem where they're integrally connected to that problem. They can see it very clearly. They can't solve it, but they take a step towards it and they mobilize others, and they turn around and actually they've created some very significant action. So we're not saying activists have to be noisy or aggressive. We're saying it's that ability to look at a problem and not just go, well, I hope somebody does something about it, but rather, I think that one might have my name on it. I think I can help. I'll mobilize others to help.
And so what challenges do business leaders face in adopting this activist mindset? I mean, there's huge pushback in the United States, and companies have had to drop them, or President Trump cuts them out of getting any kind of government contracts.
Well, I think we should differentiate two things here. Because all of these questions are so contested, because they involve national boundaries, because they involve new paradigms of operating in the business world and so forth, it's not totally surprising that there are political headwinds. They're very clear and loud political headwinds in America, but that's not the only part of the world where there's political debate around these kinds of things. In a way, what we've been talking about to date, and we will probably dive more into the detail of, if you're looking at an issue like water use in your business, or as you were talking a moment ago, you know, waste in parts of the world, these are issues where they're not so much political. They're about what are the big societal questions that your business integrally is involved with. And how do you help for efficiency reasons, for public benefit reasons, for cost reasons, for long-term profitability and resilience reasons in your business need to act on those? One of the problems being this type of a leader in today's business is that you risk getting caught in the high-level political dialogue. The businesses that are serious about it are mostly very clear why it's a business imperative for them, why their long-term resilience as a business, why their long-term profitability, risk management, where the opportunities are for them in a business in getting this right, where their license to operate is with the governments they're close to. So I think that the way of dealing with it is understanding why strategically this issue or particular issue you're looking at is integral to your business and where you can solve problems that work for the business and for the wider world. That's how you deal with it. You deal with it as a business imperative, not as a political football.
What are the main global crises discussed that impact both society and business?
Climate change. We've mentioned it with insurance. Insurance is showing, it isn't just that it's affecting insurance. The insurance industry is showing us the risk problem of global warming. This is a huge crisis everywhere in the world, and businesses are in one form or another having to deal with those crises. There is no government in the world that isn't in some way trying to find its response regulatory to this question. Waste. Plastic waste is a very visible, clear public consciousness side of waste, but there's lots of other forms of waste. that are a genuine challenge. And of course, with waste goes pollution. You look at the kinds of questions, for example, on conflict minerals that come up, which are partly environmental waste, but they're also partly societal challenge, blood diamonds, conflict minerals, and so on. These are issues that are very, very close to the heart of business. Water is becoming increasingly an issue. It takes thousands of gallons of water to make a pair of jeans. Cars use a lot of water. So increasingly, as the world is water stressed, areas of the world are water stressed, businesses are having to work out, what do we do about water? So the big environmental questions are obvious. You know, the biodiversity question is huge. All businesses today that grow stuff, whether it's stuff for clothes or stuff for food, are having to work out what to do about the fact that yields are falling because soil is no longer healthy in the way it was. And that's happened because of extractive business processes. Those extractive business processes have driven a huge amount of growth and fed a lot of people, but it's got to the far end of the spectrum of what you can do without pushing it back. So that's why you see so much regenerative farming coming to the fore. And that's before you get to inclusive workforces or the price of drugs in systems where people can't afford drugs and yet they're mission critical in life, or the role of the internet and tech players in the kind of content that today is available in our lives. These are questions which are integrally involved in business. And the world is very exercised about. It's very difficult to see how you run a business today if you're in telecoms and you're not thinking about the content that runs over the networks. If you're a water business today and you're not working out how to get clean water, hot water, into people's homes, and meanwhile, if you're a car business, working out how to use less water. These questions are integral to business today, and they are well talked about on a global stage as crises. And the world is very exercised, as one can see, about multiple crises happening at the same time. Inevitably, this is a business question. It doesn't matter what the politics are. How do you as a business treat with the questions that are close to home for your business?
How does the concept of double materiality relate to corporate responsibility? And you need to kind of explain that.
Yes. Okay, let me try. So corporate responsibility was a term that was used a lot a while back, wasn't it? Gradually, ESG started to take over from corporate responsibility. I think at the time when that language came in, environment, society, governance, ESG, it was because a lot of corporate responsibility, terrific work was going on under the banner of corporate responsibility, but ESG was starting to say, wait a minute, this is more integral to a business just than the things you choose to be responsible for. You are going to have to be accountable for how you act as a business. Business risk in those areas and material risk, anybody running a business knows that they are looking at material risk to the business. ESG traditionally has looked at the risk to the business of global warming, the risk to the business of water scarcity. Perfectly reasonable. That is how you would look at risk. But that's a one-way ticket. Double materiality is, and what are you as a risk to that issue? What carbon emissions are you putting out? How much water are you using? It's a two-way street. It's double materiality, materiality to the business of the risk, materiality to the world of the business operations. That has started to come into play in the dialogue in the last, say, 5 years. You can start to see some places around the world build double materiality into the regulation. Why? Well, because if you're a government today, let's take plastics because it's easy and visible. If you're a government today, it's very difficult to see how you're not going to try regulating on plastics. It is very clear how huge the problem of plastic waste is, and that's before you get to plastics and health, which is beginning to rise up the agenda with microplastics and so forth. So governments have plastics on their agenda very, very clearly. They are not just regulating for the problem of risk on the company, they're regulating for the problem of the company's risk to the world and to the government that they're running. The big polluters on plastic, big drinks companies and so on, are putting out billions of tons of plastic each year. So those are externalities. Those are the external costs of the profits they report to the capital markets. So double materiality is really a way of going, how are you starting to build into your business what was thought of as an external cost? A lot of what's driving the front edge of ESG today is externalities. The world can no longer afford that scale of externalities coming from the big businesses. So regulation is bound to look at the risk to the business and the risk to the world of the way the business is operating. It's going to become more and more material.
What are some specific examples of crises that businesses are involved with, such as climate change and biodiversity loss?
Well, I think that's exactly what we were just saying a second ago. These are the crises that businesses are involved in. So in a sense, the climate one is very, very clear. So let's look at the biodiversity loss one for a minute, just to open up an area which is still very new for a lot of businesses. We have been able to feed the world through increasingly efficient operational practices in farming around the world. And indeed, that's been partly driving yields harder and harder. It's been making new crops. It's the way we fertilize. It's the way we collect, and so on and so on. We've fed more and more people as the billions have grown, and more places of the world have been lifted out of poverty. However, that system of driving food production has really reached a place where all over the world, it's clear, not just to scientists, but to business leaders, yields are falling. It's harder to get that same yield. Climate change is driving crops out of certain areas. Cocoa is getting more expensive because of heat. Yields aren't the same because of soil health and so on. So they're having to deal with this. So that means fundamentally changing your operations. That's a very big deal if you're a company, which is why these subjects are now material to the business. So not only are you having to find different crops, different seeds, different methods of watering, different methods of protection of crops and so forth, but you're also having to think, you look at the biggest companies of the world in food production. They rely on the farmers. And as one of the leaders of one of the biggest food businesses said to me, the farmers can't manage this. You try being a farmer today, it's tough. You're running on very small margins. You may have a lot of invested capital, but this is a tough business. So to ask them to change their operational practices, that's huge. So the big food producers are having to work out how to incentivize and help, how to pay for certain different kinds of crops, how to create loans that allow farmers that they count on to transition. These are huge operational practices that are changing, which is why what you're seeing now is it's much more contested. People are realizing how profound this is to business operation. And that's just one example. You could give it on drugs, you could, and costing of drugs, you could give it on water and changing your operational processes in factories. These are huge operational issues now.
In chapter 3, what changed in corporate accountability exemplified by the sacking of Rio Tinto's CEO, I think his name is Jacob Stossholm?
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting question. Yes. Well, we've talked so far quite a lot about things that are environmental because they're easy to see and explain. There was an important moment where Rio Tinto, one of the world's biggest mining companies, they destroyed an Aboriginal site in Australia. Now, that wasn't the first time a big mining company has done such a thing. And a lot of companies have got very good at managing their practices around these things, about bringing the indigenous communities around them into dialogue with them and so on and so forth. But for many years, companies did that kind of thing and kind of managed their way through it. In this instance, they knew that there was a problem in the communities around them. They ignored that problem and they went ahead and destroyed the site. And that Aboriginal community kicked into gear. Activists, they kicked into gear and they went, oi, that's not okay with us. And they really mobilized. And in today's communications landscape, they can mobilize. And it became so complicated, difficult, and embarrassing for that company that they parted company with their CEO. And by the way, not the only person in the company who left. Now, the reason that's significant is that many people who lead businesses today have been used to the idea that they can run businesses in a kind of control and command and control structure, and they're running things from the center. And these are just small guys. Yes, they have to behave properly to them, be responsible, corporate responsibility, but really those are small guys and we don't have to worry. In today's world, a small group of people can overturn you. That's a huge difference in today's world for business leaders. We see employee activism come up. We don't want you to behave like that on this issue, employees are saying. And they've said it from gender equality through to climate. So this thing about a small community being able to be heard on a much closer to level playing field with a big corporate, that's different than it has been before. And it's another reason businesses are having to treat with these questions differently.
How is employee activism influencing businesses and their leadership teams? And are they still today in 2025? When you wrote the book, for sure, but now today?
Yes, I think it shows up in different ways. What you probably don't see is what we did see for a while, which is literally employees often being out in the street. But when I talk to business leaders, one of the things they find quite complicated and difficult, I think, is there are so many different opinions even within one organization. And so questions that perhaps never used to be on that radar screen are now on the senior leadership's radar screen. So I had an American leader of a Fortune 500 company, a big retail company, say to me, I didn't know that talking about Ukraine or talking about Gaza was on my job description. But these days it is. I didn't know that having to explain to my female employees where I stand on their health was part of my job description, and now it is. So the employee activism isn't so much today pushing and shoving from a particular direction. It's the fact that CEOs, leadership teams are having to deal with so many multiple arenas of question and have something that is credible, thoughtful, serious to say on them, that it changes the nature of leadership inside a business today.
How has market concentration and business scale affected societal impacts and externalities?
Well, I think it goes back to the point about externalities we were talking about a moment ago. If a business is a small business, in the dual materiality world, a company is not having much impact on the outside world. But if you are a company, to use the example we used before, making plastics today and putting billions of tons of plastic into the ecosystem for other people to clean up, the fact that you're that large, and often the small local municipalities around you can't clean up fast enough for that plastic, the world is going to have to turn to you and say, what are you doing about it? Now, even 10 years ago, I would meet business leaders that go, that's not my problem cleaning up the plastic. That's the local government's problem. Today, that is not what is being said. It's you're the producers of that plastic. What are you going to do about it? So the scale of companies means that the externalities they're throwing off are much greater, which also means that regulation is coming at them to go, so what are you to that? And that's in every single one of these issues. If you're a very big palm oil producer, what are you to the problem of stopping deforestation? So scale is turning these questions around and asking the big companies to be part of the solutions. That's why that scale has started to really matter.
How do evolving stakeholder demands reshape leadership priorities today compared to a decade ago?
I think it's the fact that there are just so many different voices. Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, oil and gas and renewables, go on and on and on and on. The complexity and contestedness means that what I meet most often is business leaders asking the question, how do I navigate through the fact that that activism is coming at me from every possible direction, and I can't answer everybody. I don't have an answer, but also the answers don't all add up. These are intractably difficult problems with stakeholders that are not eye to eye, so I can't find a way. So a lot of this thing about taking an active, proactive position yourself as a business leader is going, what really should I focus on? What do I believe is material to this business where I can have an impact? and then stay the course on those things which matter to you, because there will always be so many voices. And you can feel this difference between what's politically noisy and what's a business imperative is an area where a lot of the political noise is almost trying to pull you off balance, where proper business leadership on these issues is, I need to do this for this business. We need to sort out what we're doing on conflict minerals or inclusive workforces or whatever the question you want to focus on is. This is the business rationale for doing it, and this is the action I'm taking. And I can stand by that to any of these audiences.
Do talent management and employee expectations relate to corporate activism? I know for people under the age of 35 around the world, this is a very important issue for them, especially in the types of companies that they pick to provide their skills to.
Couldn't be more true. And if I ask business leaders, why are you doing this? High on that list of why is next generation employees expect us to. We cannot recruit into the next generation if we can't do this. So it comes back to this central theme, which is, what kind of a business leader are you today? It's very difficult to see how a business leader that goes, this is nothing to do with me, these questions are nothing to do with me, are actually, it is actually tenable. And it's also very interesting at a deep personal level. I don't know if you noticed, Carl Icahn, one of the most read in tooth and claw shareholder activists ever seen. His own family, next generation owned family, turned his mind to look at how pig farming is done. The next generation is looking at the generation in charge today and going, is the way you're running it okay? Is that okay with you? And we very often hear business leaders say, yes, I'm hearing that from my kids. I'm hearing that at the kitchen table. They're asking me that question. So it is in the workforce, but people know it's in society.
What new pressures do investors place on companies related to ESG and societal issues? And it used to be they were pressing them to get their act straight. And now it seems that that's maybe gone the opposite direction.
Yes, great question. But partly because I think it touches on this thing which is everybody's feeling, which is, wasn't a while ago, weren't we all pushing towards this in the same direction, and everybody was moving in the same direction, the investors even were there, and there was a feeling of, investors really care about this. And at the moment, the mood is, wait a second, we have to get our house in order here. It has to be very clear, very straightforward how we do this. So the direct pressure from investors and questions raised in investor meetings and so on has dialed down. What has dialed up in a big way, which I think is really interesting, is, can you show me the data? So what you're seeing now is the pressure for disclosure on data. I mean, for example, if you took deforestation and palm oil, which is a very interesting question, the big companies have for quite a long time reported deforestation on their own plantations. And indeed, like you see in oil and gas, like you see in farming, like you see in most areas that have an environmental impact, the big companies have got very good at being clear about what they're doing about it. The challenges, say, in deforestation arena, is the companies that aren't the ones that are reporting into the public markets today, and a lot of the deforestation is happening in the second and third tiers of the supply chain. What you're seeing today is the combination of satellites, data, AI, data being used, techniques being used in the plantations themselves, are identifying where the deforestation is happening in a way that was not possible even 10 years ago, not possible even 5 years ago. So what is happening now is that the big players are being expected to produce data on where the deforestation is and what is the material risk to them of that level of deforestation. So the conversation these days is showing up in data and how are you disclosing your impact, and more businesses having comparative data is informing investors where the risks are. That's where I think the front line of this question is today.
So how do companies balance acting on societal issues while maintaining financial performance? And we heard many folks talk about that that wasn't really part of what a company's focus should be on. It's the company's job is to give a good return to the investors. But at the same time, people are expecting them to be more responsible global citizens.
Well, maybe it goes back to almost your very first remark. When you actually look at what is going on for companies because of these big societal questions, it starts being common sense as a business leader that you have a point of view and an action plan on it. So what you're not seeing, and I think that makes a lot of sense too, is if it really isn't important to your business, if your business can't make a difference on this question, or if it doesn't add up in the long term for your business, then you're probably right not to be doing it. But a lot of this is about long-term resilience. Companies are looking, as we were talking earlier, looking at the cost of not acting on water resource or waste or whatever it is. And so if you're expecting the return only to be seen in the next quarter or even in the next year or two, then you can't make it make sense. But if you're looking at whether or not your business can maintain yields in the fields 5 years and 10 years from now, it starts to make sense. So it's not so much whether you're making a return or not. It's more, are you seeing the imperative in the outside world of needing to manage the risk for the long term of not responding to these things? And then how are you balancing the way you invest in the solutions that are needed? So it's a time frame thing and a relevance question. It's not whether, it's how, over what period, why, and in what areas you should focus your attention.
What's the difference between playing the game and changing the game regarding societal issues?
Yes. Well, we sometimes say to the companies we work with, it's useful to think about playing the game or winning the game. And the reason we put it like that is inevitably there's a lot of companies where the role will really just be, okay, well, what are we being asked to do by regulation? Let's do the minimum required by regulation. Are we more or less in the pack? We're not going to get, fined for it. We're not going to get disgraced for it. We're fine. That's playing the game. What's expected as a bare minimum. But actually, the companies that are really taking seriously that this is part of their long-term resilience as a company, they are winning the game. They're leading the game. They're out in front. And that is, take the destiny into your own hands. Don't be on the back foot with people attacking you. Go, for the long-term resilience of my company, this is what I think I ought to do. So to give you an example, and an example actually that plays back into the question you were asking a moment ago. If you took Maersk, which is one of the world's biggest shipping companies, which is a story we feature in the book.
We see them everywhere.
They're everywhere. I mean, you just literally see them everywhere. They're one of the world's biggest shipping companies. They put it like this. When we commission a ship, it is on the oceans for 25 years, 35 years. So if we're commissioning ships today in 2025, they are on the ocean in 2050 and beyond. So if we're commissioning engines that only run on fossil fuels today, those engines will be only running on fossil fuels in 2050. So if you think that we're actually going to need to transition to other energy sources along the way, we'd better start doing that now. Now, the industry of shipping had been really in stalemate for about 10 years because the companies were going, well, we can't produce ships that run on something other than fossil fuels because there isn't any supply of anything other than fossil fuels. Fossil fuel sources, energy sources, were going, well, we can't produce other sources because there's no ships to run them on. Maersk went, you know what, we've got to break this deadlock. And they became the first company in the world to commission big ocean-going ships that would run on something other than fossil fuel. They ran 8 of them as a first base commission. But in order to do that, they actually invested in the companies that were going to produce the supply. They worked with the industry through the industry body globally on how you would change standards on the supply so that if anybody else were to follow them, there was good global supply. And they started calling for the industry at large to do it. It started to work really powerfully. So they immediately doubled down and commissioned more ships. Suddenly, the 8 became 13 and so on and so on. Now, in the scale of their fleet, it's small. But what they've done in taking that action is to show it's possible to commission ships that don't run on fossil fuels. Now, that is, in the language of our dialogue today, an active, proactive, pragmatic activist position. Somebody needs to break this deadlock, change the paradigm that this can't be done. We're going to start. And actually now you see all over the world, people starting to go, wait a minute, it can be done, let's go. So I think that thing about playing the game and winning the game is to do with, might you be the kind of leader who goes, I can see this problem, I see it's really difficult, I see it's systemic, I see I'm not the whole answer, but I am part of the problem here, that we've only got ships that do this, and I could be part of the solution if I acted slightly differently. That is, yes, a big investment today, but it's also a commercial decision for the long term. They got their clients to underwrite the shift over. If we commission these ships, will you use these ships? So they went for a systemic solution that brought their whole ecosystem around them. That is definitely setting out to set the pace on the game. That is not playing the game because it's the minimum we can do. And there's everything in between.
Please decide which societal issues to prioritize for leadership. Because during the heyday during the pandemic, they were doing it just to appease people, whether they believed it or not. So how do they do that? I mean, Google was being called out by its own employees about these issues.
Exactly, completely. That was a very good example of employee activism. I think it's a very interesting question. We have a phrase we use with the companies that we're working with. You really start to see them move powerfully when they pivot towards the problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is a real example. There was a pharmaceutical company in America who felt we want to be really good at being responsible on these issues. In the past, we've had a good reputation. We want to focus on something and do it really, really well. So they asked their employees, what are the big social questions that really matter to you? And the answer came back, gun crime. Well, that's a very important societal issue whenever it happens, and certainly in America today. So it wasn't surprising that they got that answer back from employees about what bothers them. But if you're a big pharmaceutical company, probably you're not actually going to be a company that's going to move the needle on gun crime. Even if you used your voice publicly to say so, you can't come up with solutions on gun crime. But in a world where also, as you can see in America, as you can experience in America, who gets medicines, who gets treatments, in what forms, where, when, at what cost, through what channels, is a very big question. So pivoting towards the problem of access to medicine and treatment, that's right at the heart of your business. Go to that problem. If you are a palm oil company, go to the heart of the deforestation problem. That is the material risk. It is the material issue. Act on the material question. So what we mean by pivot towards it is we have another way we often describe it to the companies we work with. That's a yes, but syndrome. But we actually want to go ahead, actually work on it, actually do it. So you'll hear a company which is challenged by palm oil going, yeah, we'd love to work on the palm oil question, but the trouble is, it's really difficult for us. We're challenged about it. Yeah, exactly. Turn towards it, pivot towards it, act on that one. That's where leadership comes from. That's where you can make the biggest difference, where the challenge is. And in a corporate mindset, quite often what you get is, but it's a very difficult one. The clue is there. Go to the difficult one. Don't do the one that might be emotionally satisfying, but actually has nothing to do with your business, and you can't act on it to scale.
And we have a question from the audience. We live in a very political world where geopolitics are driving many wars on the top of the climate change or impacting the whole planet and its population. How do you think different sizes of businesses can impact today's world?
It's a really good question. The political contentiousness all over the world today is certainly evident in America, but not exclusively. That does mean, as we've been saying earlier, that businesses can almost get pulled into the political debate. If you stay with the business question and the business debate, and you're looking for long-term resilience and to take the long-term opportunities in front of your business, if you're a very big business, you are systemically important and you're going to be pushed by the regulator to do it. If you're a smaller scale business, in my experience, typically you're playing into the ecosystem of the big players. Maybe they're your customers, maybe you are innovating for them. So you may be a smaller business, but you're part of a big ecosystem. In the front line of people who are leaders in these big societal questions today in the business world, they're all realizing, everybody is realizing, no individual company can take this on by themselves. No individual government can take it on. All of these are big societal systemic questions. So what you're seeing is that the front edge of this work is in systems change. And in system change, the big companies get together with the small companies, with the policymakers, with civil society, and try to work out how together they can work on something. We were talking about regeneration in agriculture. The big companies are working with the smaller farmers. If you look at the fashion industry, a lot of small businesses are starting to turn to their customers with a promise that the clothing will be more sustainable. Well, if that's the case, where is their supply chain for that? So it's about where do you fit in the ecosystem? What big companies can you attach yourself to that are speaking on these kinds of questions? And where can you promise your customers and work with your customers where progress is made? So you're always looking at where are you having an impact? Where is the regulation and the societal concern coming to you on these questions? And who can you team up with beyond your company to help build new solutions? And once you start looking, there's clues all over the place. You know, the fashion industry is alight with organizations trying to do recycling models, trying to find new materials that are more sustainable, trying to grow cotton more sustainably. Whatever industry you're in, there's an ecosystem of big companies and small companies trying to come together to find solutions.
What's the yes but syndrome, and how can companies overcome it?
Oh, well, the yes but syndrome is what I was referring to a moment ago, which is, you know, we often work with a company where we go, why don't you get active in this area? Use the example I was using a moment ago. You're a pharmaceutical company, get busy on the problem of access to medicines. You're a palm oil company, get busy on the question of deforestation. You're a company that uses a lot of beef, get busy on the problem of methane and so forth. And very often the corporate response is, we'd love to, we completely see it's a big issue, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And people criticize us for it, so we'd rather keep our heads below the parapet. The active, proactive position is, you're right, it's a big problem. It's the problem we're being criticized for. So why don't we turn it round and go, yeah, and we can help. It's that pivot towards the problem, act on the problem, rather than go, yes, because it's a big problem, we'd love to, but we can't. That's the difference. All the leadership positions are the things that people are being criticized for. That leadership team is prepared to step into the problem and help start to find solutions. Not because they're the only player, not because they'll be perfect, not because they can fix the whole thing, but because they see it's a problem. They see they're integrally connected to the problem because of the nature of the business, and they can help. In 15 years doing this work with companies, the simplest thing is when they take a step, when they are being constructive, can you authentically, as a leader in that company, ask the question, did that help? And if it did, you're on the right road. What are you contributing to the solutions that are needed?
Here's the last question. What are some common anxieties leaders face when moving towards a more activist approach, and how can they address these? And I think probably a lot of them are afraid they'll lose their job over this.
You're so right. It can be daunting. I think the trick is you don't stamp around claiming it. You identify where it's integral to the business that you act on this, and you build a plan. When I asked a lot of business leaders when we were writing, how do you make this happen? How? The very first thing that every single one says is you build it into the operational plan, the strategic plan of the business, like you do anything else. You explain why it's business necessary. You explain why it's part of the strategy. You put people on it who are going to report to you in the way that they would report to you on anything else. You map out a plan, you measure it, and you deliver it. It becomes part of the way you run the business. That in itself is a paradigm shift. But if you root it in the business, you capture the plan, you expect it to report and deliver, you're building it into the business. If you grandstand about it, if you stamp around saying we're saving the world, you're right. That's not going to work. It never did, but it's especially not going to work right now. But the point is, what's driving this is the realities in the world, the realities of the workforce, the realities of the environmental challenges we face, the realities of the food challenges we face. Stick with what your business is connected to in these crises. Understand them as the world sees them, build them into your business, and start looking for solutions. If you do that in a very practical way, because you are doing it for the long-term profitability, resilience, health of your business and the customers who need it, you are well focused. You will sustain yourself well in these efforts.
Lucy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I think leaders need to be reading these books, this book in particular, so they can focus on this for the common good and their own bottom line. So I thank you so much for taking the time.
It's an enormous pleasure to talk to you about this. It's a very big subject for the kind of leaders we need today and the leaders people want to be. Thank you very much.
Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and I will be off next week as I'm taking my daughter to Japan. So I'll see you the following week. Take care, everybody.